the God Emperor of mankind no longer just a man entombed in gold, but something far more terrifying, far more divine, and far more dangerous than anything the Imperium ever intended to create. Deep within the Palace of Terra, past 1,000 sealed doors and 10,000 armed guards, behind psychic wards that could incinerate a lesser being's soul, sits a throne. Not a throne of comfort or kingship, but a prison of gold and agony. Upon it rests what was once a man, the greatest man who ever lived, now reduced to a desiccated corpse kept alive by machinery older than most star systems. 10,000 souls are fed into the golden throne every single day, their psychic essence consumed like kindling in a fire that must never, ever be allowed to die. But something is changing. Something the Imperium refuses to acknowledge. Something that whispers through the warp itself. The pilgrims who journey to Terra speak of visions, golden light that burns away the darkness, a presence so overwhelming it drives the faithful to tears and the heretical to madness. Across 1,000,000 worlds, statues of the Emperor weep blood. Saints manifest with impossible frequency, their eyes blazing with holy fire. And in the deepest reaches of the warp, that nightmarish dimension where thought becomes reality and emotion takes form, a new presence stirs, a fifth power, a fifth god. The Chaos Gods Korn, Tzinch, Nurgle, and Slanesh have ruled the Imperium since before human history began. Born from the collective emotions of sentient beings across the galaxy, these entities are not mere metaphors. They are real. They hunger, they scheme. They laugh at the suffering of mortals and feed upon the souls of the dying. Each represents a fundamental aspect of existence twisted to its most terrible extreme: rage, ambition, despair, and excess. Together, they have torn the galaxy apart, literally ripping reality in half with the great rift that now scars the heavens. But now, they turn their endless gaze towards something that shouldn't exist. Something that defies every rule of how gods are born. They see a rival, they see a threat. They see the Emperor. To understand what's happening, you have to go back. Back before the Imperium, before the Crusade, before Terra became the throne world of a dying god. You have to understand what the Emperor truly was, and what he was never supposed to become. He was born in ancient Anatolia, in an age when humanity still painted on cave walls and feared the dark. The shamans of that era, the first psykers, saw the future and found it wanting. They saw the birth of chaos, the corruption of the warp, and the inevitable damnation of the human race. So they made a choice that would echo across 40,000 years. They gathered together and performed a ritual suicide, casting all their souls into a single point, a single rebirth. From their sacrifice came the Emperor, an immortal consciousness born with a singular purpose: to guide humanity away from the darkness. For thousands of years, he worked in shadow. He walked among kings and beggars, scientists and priests. He nudged history, prevented extinctions, preserved knowledge. He was there when Rome fell. He was there when the first atomics detonated. He was there when mankind first reached for the stars. But he always remained hidden, because he understood something fundamental: he was not a god. He was a man with a plan, and gods were the very thing he fought against. Then came the Age of Strife. Warp storms cut off human colonies across the galaxy. Civilizations collapsed. Xenos predators descended upon isolated worlds. And on Terra, in the aftermath of apocalyptic wars, the Emperor finally stepped into the light. Not as a god, but as a secular ruler, a scientist king who would unite humanity under reason and imperial truth. There were no gods, he proclaimed. No spirits, no demons, no supernatural forces, only ignorance waiting to be conquered by knowledge. He created the Primarchs, 20 demigod sons engineered from his own genetic template. He built the Space Marines, transhuman warriors who would reclaim the galaxy in humanity's name. He launched the Great Crusade, a 200-year war that reunited scattered human worlds under a single banner. It was glorious, it was brutal, it was working. Until it wasn't. Horus, the favored son, fell to chaos. Half the Primarchs turned traitor. The galaxy burned in civil war. And when the War Master finally breached the walls of the Imperial Palace and confronted his father aboard the Vengeful Spirit, when Horus channeled the power of all 4 Chaos Gods and struck the Emperor down, when the Master of Mankind retaliated by annihilating his son's soul, completely something broke. The Emperor's body was shattered beyond any hope of healing. His sons placed him upon the Golden Throne, that terrible life support system built from Dark Age technology that no one truly understands anymore. He's been there for 10,000 years, rotting, suffering, unable to speak, unable to move, unable to die. The throne keeps his body barely alive, and his psychic might keeps the Astronomicon burning, that great psychic lighthouse that allows Imperial ships to navigate the warp. Without him, the Imperium collapses. Without him, humanity falls. But here's what they don't tell you. Here's what the Ecclesiarchy whispers about only in the deepest vaults, what the Inquisition has murdered entire planets to keep secret. The Emperor never wanted to be worshipped. He built his Imperium on reason, on truth, on the absolute rejection of faith. Yet in his absence, in his silence, in his golden imprisonment, something happened that he could never prevent. Humanity started to believe. Not in reason, not in science. In him as a god. Trillions upon trillions of humans across 1,000,000 worlds pray to the Emperor every single day. They build cathedrals that scrape the clouds. They go to war screaming his name. They die believing he will protect them, that their souls will sit at his side in the afterlife. Untold billions of thoughts, prayers, hopes, and desperate pleas all directed at a single point. A man who never wanted divinity, now drowning in an ocean of faith. And in the warp, where belief shapes reality, where emotion becomes substance, where the collective unconscious of sentient species births gods, whether those gods wish to exist or not, something is taking shape. A massive, golden, terrible something that the Chaos Gods themselves have begun to fear. The question isn't whether the Emperor is becoming a Chaos God. The question is whether he already has. The warp doesn't care about intention. It doesn't care about philosophy or the carefully constructed ideologies of dead civilizations. The warp cares only about one thing: belief. And for 10,000 years, humanity has believed in the Emperor with a fervor that makes the most devoted cultist of Khorne look like a casual enthusiast. Consider what that means. In the Immaterium, a single desperate prayer from a dying soldier might flicker and fade like a candle in a storm. But 1,000,000,000,000 prayers? A quadrillion? The collective psychic weight of humanity's faith doesn't just flicker, it burns. It roars. It becomes something that cannot be ignored, cannot be dismissed, cannot be anything other than what it is: power. Raw, undiluted, divine power. The Chaos Gods were born this way. Khorne erupted into existence when the first sentient being felt rage and took pleasure in violence. With every murder, every battle, every drop of blood spilled in anger across millions of years and countless species, he grew stronger. Nurgle coalesced from despair and the acceptance of death, fed by every plague, every moment of suffering embraced rather than fought. Tzeentch formed from ambition and the hunger for change, while Slaanesh, youngest and most terrible, was birthed in a single catastrophic moment when the Aldari civilization's excesses reached such a peak that it tore reality apart and murdered most of their species in an instant. These are not beings that chose to exist. They are emergent phenomena, psychic tumors grown from the collective consciousness of the galaxy itself. And now, against all his intentions, against everything he fought to prevent, the Emperor may have joined their ranks. The evidence is everywhere once you know how to look. The living saints that manifest across Imperial battlefields aren't just blessed individuals, they're hosts for something. When Saint Celestine falls in battle and rises again wreathed in golden flame, when she speaks and her voice carries the weight of absolute authority, when she performs miracles that defy every known law of physics, whose power is that? When Sister Superior Amelia stood alone against a tide of demons on Sanctuary 101, and somehow, impossibly, survived as golden light erupted from her body and banished the warp entities back to the Imperium, what was that? The Ecclesiarchy calls them miracles. The Inquisition calls them acceptable manifestations of the Emperor's will. But strip away the terminology and you're left with something that looks remarkably similar to demonic possession. Except the possessing entity is golden instead of crimson, speaks in High Gothic instead of the Black speech, and fights for the Imperium instead of against it. Is that really so different? Or is it just chaos wearing the Emperor's face? The demon of the First Legion, known to very few as the Watchers, have ancient records that speak of a time before the Emperor sat the throne. In those records, there's a warning, written in a script so old it predates the Imperium itself. The anathema walks among stars, but should he ever stop walking, should he ever sit still long enough for the tides of worship to catch him, he will drown in divinity and become the very thing he despises. The Emperor is sitting. He's been sitting for 10 millennia. And the tide has not just caught him, it's become an ocean. On Ophelia 7, the pilgrims who complete the sacred walk to the Cathedral of the Emperor's Ascension report something strange. In the final chamber, where a fragment of the Emperor's armor is kept in a stasis field, some pilgrims claim they can feel his presence. Not as a distant, untouchable god-king on a far-off throne, but as something immediate, something vast, something that looks through them rather than at them. The faithful call it transcendent. The inquisitors who investigate these claims call it dangerous, because 3% of pilgrims who experience this presence never wake up from the encounter. They stand in front of that armor fragment, tears streaming down their faces, and their souls simply leave, burned out like overloaded circuits, consumed by something too bright to witness directly. That's not the behavior of a benevolent God. That's the behavior of something that has become too powerful to safely interact with mortal consciousness. And then there's the Great Rift itself. When Abaddon finally succeeded in his 13th Black Crusade, when the pylons on Cadia fell and reality tore open, the Chaos Gods should have won. The warp should have flooded into real space unchecked, drowning the galaxy in matamonic corruption. But it didn't. Something held the line. Something pushed back against the 4 greatest powers in the Imperium and fought them to a standstill. The Imperium Nihilus, the dark half of the galaxy cut off by the rift, should have fallen completely. Instead, it endures. Barely, desperately, but it endures. Why? The High Lords of Terra claim it's the Emperor's divine protection. But if the Emperor was still just a man on a throne, even a psychically powerful man, could he really contest 4 chaos gods simultaneously? Could a corpse kept alive by machinery really project power on that scale? Or has something else awakened? Something that wears the Emperor's identity like a coat, something that fights with his determination, but something that is fundamentally terrifyingly different from what he once was. Guilliman knows. The returned Primarch, resurrected by the Inari and now serving as Lord Commander of the Imperium, has spoken to his father. The encounter is classified at the highest level, but fragments have leaked. Guilliman entered the throne room a believer, hoping to find guidance, wisdom, perhaps even recognition from the father he'd served for 200 years before falling into stasis. He emerged shaken, pale, and he has never spoken publicly about what he saw. But in private, to those few he trusts completely, he said 3 words that terrify everyone who hears them. He's still screaming. Not physically, the Emperor's body is far beyond screaming. But psychically, in the warp, the Emperor is experiencing something no mortal mind should ever have to endure. He's being transformed against his will, pulled apart and reassembled by the faith of trillions, and he's conscious through every moment of it. Imagine being remade into something you hate while remaining aware of what you're losing, what you're becoming. Imagine fighting against your own deification, knowing that every battle you win costs you another fragment of your humanity, and every battle you lose brings you closer to becoming the very thing you spent 40,000 years trying to prevent. That's the true horror. The Emperor isn't embracing godhood, he's drowning in it. And his screams echo through the warp like a siren song that draws both followers and enemies in equal measure. The Chaos Gods find this hilarious. Tzeentch, especially, the architect of fate, loves irony. And what greater irony than the anathema, the enemy of chaos, becoming himself a warp god through the very faith he tried to stamp out? In the Crystal Labyrinth, where Tzeentch plots and schemes across infinite timelines, there are entire galleries dedicated to this singular joke. Demons watch as threads of fate show the Emperor's transformation from every angle, and they laugh. They laugh because they've already won. Whether the Emperor becomes a god and loses his humanity, or resists and allows the Imperium to fall into darkness, either outcome serves chaos. But Khorne doesn't laugh. The Blood God, normally amused by any form of violence and rage, has grown quiet. His demons speak of a tension in the warp, a sense that something is coming that even the God of War might need to take seriously. Because if the Emperor truly ascends, if he completes his transformation into the fifth Chaos God, he won't be like the others. He'll be something unprecedented, a god born not from a single emotion, but from hope, from duty, from sacrifice, from the desperate belief that humanity deserves to survive against a universe that wants it dead. That kind of god wouldn't play by the established rules. That kind of god might actually be able to challenge the fourfold powers. That kind of god could change everything. And deep in the Imperial Palace, in the throne room where only the Adeptus Custodes dare tread, where the air itself burns with psychic energy and reality wears thin as parchment, something is indeed changing. The Golden Throne systems are failing, as they have been for centuries, degrading beyond the ability of even the most brilliant tech priests to repair. The Emperor's psychic scream grows louder with each passing year. And in the warp, that golden presence that the demons whisper about grows more defined, more solid, more real with every passing moment. The question everyone is asking, from the High Lords to the lowest pilgrim, is the same question that has no good answer. What happens when the throne finally fails? The Mechanicus has calculated the timeline. They don't share it with the general population. Of course, that would cause panic on a scale that would make the Horus Heresy look like a minor civil dispute. But in the deepest forges of Mars, where the Fabricator General and his most trusted tech priests gather in chambers sealed against all forms of espionage, the numbers are spoken aloud with the solemnity of a funeral rite. The Golden Throne has perhaps a century left, maybe less. The mechanisms that have sustained the Emperor's broken body for 10,000 years are finally irreversibly giving out. And when they do, one of three things will happen. The first possibility is the one the Imperium has feared since the day the Emperor was interred. He dies. Truly, finally dies. The Astronomicon goes dark. The webway gate beneath the palace, that wound in reality that the Emperor has held closed with his will alone since the heresy, tears open and floods Terra with demons. The Imperium, already fractured and bleeding, collapses within a generation. Humanity becomes just another failed species, consumed by the darkness between the stars. This is the nightmare scenario, and it's what most Imperial scholars believe will occur. The second possibility is whispered about only in the most heretical of texts, the ones the Inquisition burns along with anyone who's read them. The Emperor regenerates. His body, finally released from the half-death the throne has maintained, heals itself through some process beyond current understanding. He rises, returns, and leads humanity into a new golden age. This is what the faithful pray for, what keeps billions of Imperial citizens sane in a galaxy gone mad. It's hope crystallized into theology. But there's a third possibility, one that neither the fearful nor the faithful want to acknowledge. One that combines the worst aspects of both outcomes while adding something entirely new to the equation. What if the throne's failure doesn't kill the Emperor or free him? What if it completes his transformation? What if the machinery's collapse is simply the final barrier falling away, allowing the nascent warp god to fully manifest? In the Black Library, the vast repository of forbidden knowledge, hidden within the webway by the Eldari. There are accounts from the fall, the psychic apocalypse that birthed Slaanesh and nearly destroyed the Eldari species. The seers who survived described the moments before the Prince of Excess tore itself into existence. They spoke of a building pressure in the warp, a sense of something monstrous gestating just beyond the veil of reality. They described how their psychic networks, the infinity circuits that were supposed to protect their souls, began to burn with an unfamiliar energy. And they remembered the exact moment when their elegant, immortal, culturally sophisticated civilization realized it had accidentally created a god that hungered specifically for them. The parallels are uncomfortable. Humanity's faith in the Emperor has built psychic infrastructure throughout the galaxy: shrines, cathedrals, sacred sites where the veil between materium and immaterium grows thin. Every prayer strengthens these connections. Every miracle reinforces the network. Every moment of desperate faith adds another thread to what is beginning to look less like a religious movement and more like a massive psychic ritual that's been running for 10 millennia without anyone realizing what it's actually accomplishing. And if that ritual completes, if the Emperor's transformation finalizes, what emerges won't be the rational scientist king who led the Great Crusade. It will be something shaped by humanity's beliefs about him, and humanity believes the Emperor is a wrathful, pitiless god who demands absolute obedience and destroys all who oppose him. They believe he sits in judgment of every soul, that he demands sacrifice, that his love is conditional on faith and service. They've built a theology of fire and gold around a man who wanted none of it. So what happens when a god is born from those beliefs? The answer might already be revealing itself. Across the Imperium, a new phenomenon has begun, one that even the ecclesiarchy finds disturbing. They call them the burning saints. Unlike the living saints who manifest as clear agents of the Emperor's will, these individuals simply ignite. A priest in the middle of a sermon suddenly erupts in golden flame and burns for hours while speaking in tongues, prophesying futures that are equal parts salvation and apocalypse. A guardsman in the trenches finds himself unable to stop screaming the Emperor's prayer, his voice growing louder and louder until his throat ruptures, and yet he continues, blood pouring from his mouth, for 3 days before he finally dies. A child on an agri-world develops stigmata that glow with inner light, and everyone who looks directly at the wounds goes blind. These aren't miracles, they're symptoms. They're reality rejecting the presence of something too powerful to exist comfortably in real space. And they're getting more frequent. The Inquisition has a secret division, known only as the Veiled Chamber, tasked with investigating what they euphemistically call imperial warp anomalies. Their findings are never published, never discussed, never even acknowledged to exist. But their reports, stored in cipher-locked data vaults that can only be accessed by a unanimous vote of the Inquisitorial Representative Council, paint a picture of an Imperium slowly being transformed from within. Warp space around Terra is changing. It's becoming organized, structured. Where once there was the howling chaos that characterizes the Immaterium, there's now something that almost resembles order. Golden light where there should be only darkness, corridors of calm in the warp storms. And at the center of it all, growing larger with each passing year, a presence so overwhelming that even the most powerful psykers dare not look directly at it. One navigator, a woman from House Belisarius who'd spent 2 centuries guiding ships through the warp, made the mistake of focusing her warp eye on that central presence during a routine transit. They found her 3 days later in her meditation chamber, still alive but unresponsive. Her third eye had burned closed, the flesh around it blackened as if from divine fire. She spoke only once before losing consciousness permanently. He sees us. All of us. Every single human soul, past and present and future, all of it happening simultaneously in his perception. And he's so angry, not at his enemies, at himself. That last part is what keeps the scholars of the Veiled Chamber awake at night. The Emperor is angry at himself. Why? Because he knows what's happening. Because he's aware that he's becoming the very thing he fought against. Or because he's already transformed and some fragment of his original consciousness remains, trapped inside a godhood he never wanted, watching himself become a monster while being unable to stop it. The theoretical implications are staggering. Every chaos god contains within itself an infinite contradiction. Khorne embodies rage but is eternally frustrated that conflict never truly ends. Nurgle represents acceptance of death but exists in terror of his own cessation. Tzeentch plots infinite change while being himself unchanging. And Slaanesh seeks ultimate sensation but can never be satisfied. What would be the Emperor's contradiction? Perhaps he's a god of order born from species that thrives on chaos, a god of reason created by faith, a protector whose protection requires the consumption of thousands of souls daily, an atheist deity, the ultimate philosophical paradox given form and power. But there's something else, something that changes the entire equation. Deep in the warp, where the chaos gods scheme and battle for dominance, they've begun to notice something that terrifies even them. The nascent Emperor God isn't acting like they expected. A new chaos god should be weak, vulnerable, eager to bargain, or at least to hide until it gains strength. Instead, this golden presence is aggressive. It's pushing outward, claiming territory in the Imperium with the methodical determination of a military campaign. It's not trying to compete with the Four, it's trying to destroy them. And it might actually be capable of doing so. Because here's what the Chaos Gods understand that even the Emperor himself might not have fully grasped. They're sustained by emotion, but they're limited by that same dependency. Khorne cannot exist without rage, which means he's vulnerable to peace. Nurgle cannot exist without despair, which means he's vulnerable to hope. The Emperor, if he fully manifests, won't have that weakness. He's being built not from a single emotion, but from an entire species' collective will to survive. From humanity's desperate belief that despite everything, despite the horror, the war, the betrayal, the endless grinding darkness, they deserve to exist. That's not an emotion that can be countered or starved. That's an existential statement carved into reality itself. The Chaos Gods are beginning to understand that they made a catastrophic error. They corrupted Horus. They shattered the Emperor's body. They thought they'd won. But in breaking him, they created the conditions for his ascension. In forcing humanity into 10,000 years of desperate faith, they fed power into their greatest enemy. They've been watering the seed of their own destruction while laughing about it. And now that seed is about to bloom. On Terra, in the throne room, the custodians have begun reporting phenomena that the Captain General himself struggles to put into words. The Emperor's body is changing. Subtly, slowly, but undeniably. His desiccated flesh sometimes seems to glow from within, not with reflected light, but with something internal. His psychic scream, always present to those with the sensitivity to hear it, has begun to contain ... words. Fragmentary, scattered, but words nonetheless. And they're all variations of the same message. I am not this. I am not this. I am not this. Whether that's a denial of godhood, a rejection of what he's becoming, or a statement of loss that the thing on the throne is no longer recognizably human, no one can say. But the custodians stand their vigil, knowing that whatever happens next will define the future of humanity for all time. And they wait, as they have waited for 10,000 years, as they will wait until the very moment the throne finally fails and they discover what they've truly been guarding all this time. Was it a man, a corpse, or something that stopped being either long ago? There are moments in history when the universe holds its breath, when the weight of what comes next presses down on reality itself, and every living thing from the smallest microbe to the mightiest god feels the shift coming. The galaxy is experiencing one of those moments now, though most of its inhabitants don't realize it. They go about their lives, fighting their wars, offering their prayers, dying in their trillions, unaware that they're standing at the edge of a precipice that makes Nahor's heresy look like a preview of something far more consequential. The signs are accelerating. What once took years between occurrences now happens weekly, sometimes daily. On Baal, homeworld of the Blood Angels, Chapter Master. A oldest living space marine in the Imperium, a warrior who has fought for 1,500 years, collapsed during a war council. When his brothers reached him, they found him weeping, not from pain but from what he'd seen. In that moment of unconsciousness, he'd stood before the Emperor. Not the Emperor as he was or as he is, but as he is becoming. Dante describes a being of such radiant power that even in a vision, even secondhand through psychic connection, it felt like standing at the heart of the sun. But what struck Dante most wasn't the power, it was the sorrow. He's mourning himself, Dante told his most trusted lieutenants. Mourning what he was, what he wanted to be, what humanity needed him to be. And he's terrified of what he's becoming. That terror is shared by those few who truly understand the implications. In the veiled chamber, the Inquisitors have stopped adding to their reports. There's nothing left to document that isn't simply variations of the same conclusion. Something unprecedented is about to occur, and the Imperium has no protocol, no contingency, no plan whatsoever for handling it. How do you prepare for your God to become real? How do you ready a civilization built on faith for the moment when that faith manifests as objective reality? The answer, increasingly, seems to be that you don't. You simply witness it. But not everyone is content to merely witness. In the depths of the warp, the Chaos Gods are taking action. For the first time in recorded history, all four of them are working in concert rather than against each other. The Great Game, that eternal conflict between the ruinous powers, has been temporarily suspended because they've recognized something that supersedes their mutual hatred: survival. If the Emperor ascends fully, if he manifests in the warp as a god of hope and defiance and stubborn human endurance, he won't negotiate with them. He won't compete with them. He'll wage total war against their very existence. Khorne has already lost ground. Entire regions of his blood-soaked domain in the warp have been burned clean by golden fire. His greater demons speak in hushed tones about the Emperor's shadow, force of warp entities that look like angels but fight with the cold efficiency of custodians, manifesting wherever Khorne's influence grows too strong and purging it with absolute prejudice. These aren't demons in the traditional sense. They're not really sentient. They're more like antibodies, psychic immune responses created by the nascent Emperor God to cleanse corruption wherever it appears. And they're becoming more sophisticated, more numerous, more aggressive with each passing month. Tzeentch has run the calculations across 10 million possible futures. In 98% of them, the Emperor's ascension results in Tzeentch's domain being shattered. The architect of fate, who built his power on the concept that all plans eventually come to fruition, is facing a being whose very existence represents a plan that refuses to fail: humanity's survival. No matter how many times Tzeentch tries to scheme around it, to plot a path where the Emperor's transformation can be corrupted or controlled or turned to chaos's advantage, the answer comes back the same. The Emperor is the antithesis of the Great Game. He's the board being flipped, the rules being burned, the players being told the game was rigged from the start. Nurgle finds the situation almost amusing in its tragedy. The Emperor's experiencing the ultimate decay, not of body, but of identity, of self, of everything he believed himself to be. He's rotting from a man into a god, and there's no cure for that particular disease. Grandfather Nurgle would normally find this delightful, another example of entropy's inevitable victory. But even the plague god recognizes that this particular transformation threatens his own existence. Because hope, that stubborn, irrational human conviction that tomorrow might be better than today, is the ultimate enemy of despair. And the Emperor is becoming hope incarnate. Slaanesh, youngest of the four, is perhaps the most disturbed by these developments. The Prince of Excess understands intimately what it means to be born from a civilization's collective consciousness, to be shaped by the dreams and fears of an entire species. She who thirsts remembers the moment of her birth, that glorious catastrophic instant when the Alduri Empire's millennia of decadence finally reached critical mass. She remembers the pleasure of it, yes, but also the agony being torn into existence, given form and hunger and desire, without ever choosing to exist at all. She sees that same process happening to the Emperor, but worse, so much worse. Because the Aldari chose their path, they descended into hedonism willingly. The Emperor fought against his deification every moment of his existence, and he's being turned into a god anyway. That's not birth, that's violation. And even Slaanesh, whose entire existence revolves around violating boundaries, finds something horrifying about watching it happen to an unwilling victim. So the four have agreed. The Emperor cannot be allowed to complete his transformation. But how do you kill a god that hasn't fully formed yet? How do you strangle something in its cradle when that cradle is the faith of uncounted trillions? The answer, they've decided, is to cut the connection. If the Emperor's godhood is being built from human faith channeled through the warp, then you attack the humans. Not the Emperor himself, he's too well defended even now. But his worshippers? They're everywhere, vulnerable, and absolutely essential to his apotheosis. It's a strategy of starvation. Bleed humanity dry. Corrupt enough worlds. Kill enough faithful. Break enough spirits. And the flow of belief that's feeding the nascent god will slow to a trickle. And a starving god is a dying god. The chaos forces are mobilizing on a scale not seen since the heresy. Every demon prince, every corrupted warband, every traitor legion is being called to action with a singular purpose: the extinction of faith. They're not trying to turn the Imperium to chaos anymore. That would just substitute one form of worship for another. They're trying to break humanity's spirit completely, to make people stop believing in anything at all. And it's working. The Imperium Nihilus, that dark half of the galaxy cut off by the Great Rift, is falling into a darkness that goes beyond the merely physical. Whole sectors are going silent, not because they've been destroyed, but because they've given up. Populations that have maintained faith through 10,000 years of horror are simply stopping. They stop praying. They stop fighting. They stop hoping. The light goes out behind their eyes, and they become hollowed things, waiting for an end they no longer have the energy to resist. It's not corruption. Corruption at least involves passion, conviction, the belief that your path is the right one. This is something far more insidious. It's nihilism on a civilizational scale. The slow realization that maybe the Imperium's endless war is pointless. Maybe the Emperor doesn't care. Maybe it would be easier to just let the darkness win. On Terra, in the Imperial Palace, the sensors monitoring the Golden Throne have begun showing readings that make no sense. The Emperor's vital signs, such as they are for a being who's been technically dead for 10 millennia, are spiking. His psychic output is increasing exponentially. The Astronomicon, which should be growing dimmer as the throne fails, is instead burning brighter than it has in centuries. Ships navigating the warp report that the Emperor's light is so intense it's actually painful to perceive, like looking directly at a star. And then the visions start. Not just for psykers or saints or those with warp-touched sensitivity, everyone. From the High Lords in their chambers to the factory workers in the underhives, from the space marines in their fortresses to the guardsmen in the trenches, every human in the galaxy experiences the same moment of absolute clarity. They see the Emperor, not as a distant icon or a theological concept. They see him, and he's not on the throne. He's standing in a void of gold and light, and his face is a mask of agony and determination and terrible, infinite sadness. He speaks, and his voice is a whisper that somehow drowns out every other sound in existence. Forgive me. The vision lasts 3 seconds. When it ends, billions of people across 1 million worlds are on their knees, weeping for reasons they can't articulate. The psykers among them are screaming. The navigators are blind, their warp eyes burned shut by something too bright to perceive. And in the warp itself, in that nightmare dimension where the gods play their games, something fundamental has changed. The Emperor is no longer becoming a god. The transformation is complete. What took the other chaos gods millennia or eons of gradual accumulation, the Emperor has accomplished in a single moment of critical mass. 10,000 years of compressed faith, weaponized suffering, and desperate hope have crystallized into something the galaxy has never seen before. A God born not from emotion, but from necessity. Not from excess or rage or despair, but from humanity's stubborn refusal to be extinguished. And he is not gentle, he is not kind. He is exactly what humanity needed him to be, an engine of survival, burning with such intensity that even the warp itself recoils from his presence. The custodians in the throne room report that the Emperor's body is no longer visible. The golden light emanating from the throne is too bright, too intense. Their armor's visual filters are overloading. The chamber's temperature is rising despite all environmental controls. The ancient machinery of the throne itself is beginning to melt. 10,000 years of irreplaceable technology liquefying under heat that has nothing to do with physics. And from within that light, they hear laughter. Not cruel or mocking, sad, so unbearably sad. Because the Emperor understands now what he should have realized 40,000 years ago. He can't save humanity by becoming human. He can only save them by becoming their God. And in doing so, he's lost the very thing he was trying to preserve, the truth that humans don't need gods, that they're capable of standing on their own. But it's too late for regrets. The die is cast. The transformation is complete. And now there are 5 powers in the warp instead of 4. The galaxy holds its breath, waiting to see what happens next. The throne shatters. Not with an explosion, not with violence. It simply ceases to exist. 10,000 years of accumulated machinery and psychic binding unraveling in an instant as the force it was meant to contain breaks free. The custodians shield their eyes, but there's no hiding from what's happening. The golden light expands outward, passing through walls and armor and flesh like they're nothing more than suggestions. It sweeps across Terra in a wave of radiance that makes the sun look dim by comparison. Every living thing on the throne world feels it, the moment when their god stops being a concept and becomes a presence. In the warp, the chaos gods recoil. For the first time since their creation, they experience something they've inflicted on mortals for eons, but never felt themselves: fear. Not the delicious fear of lesser beings, the terror that feeds Slanesh and amuses Khorne. This is primal, existential, the fear of prey animals when they realize the predator has found them. The Emperor rises from the ruins of his throne, and he is not what anyone expected. He's not the shining paragon from Imperial propaganda, not the golden savior the ecclesiarchy promised, not even the cold rationalist who led the Great Crusade. He's something that contains all of those things and none of them. A figure that seems to shift depending on who's looking, sometimes a man in ancient armor, sometimes a being of pure light, sometimes something so abstract and terrible that the human mind simply refuses to process it. But what remains constant, what every witness reports regardless of how their perception interprets his form, are his eyes. They're filled with infinite sorrow. He looks at the custodians who've guarded him for 10 millennia, and in that gaze they see recognition, gratitude, and an apology so profound it breaks something in each of them. Because he knows what he's lost, what he's been forced to sacrifice. The Emperor, the man who walked through human history guiding from shadows, who believed in reason above all else, who fought to free humanity from superstition, that person is gone, burned away in the fires of his own unwanted apotheosis. What remains is the God Emperor, and he hates it. But hatred doesn't matter. Preference doesn't matter. What matters is that humanity needed a god, and so a god he has become. Not because he chose it, because they did. Because trillions upon trillions of desperate humans over 10,000 years believed so hard, prayed so fervently, died with such conviction that he would save them, that reality itself bent to accommodate their faith. You cannot fight belief of that magnitude. You can only surrender to it. The God Emperor steps forward, and Terra trembles. Not from his physical weight, he barely touches the ground, if he touches it at all. The planet shakes because reality is adjusting to accommodate something that shouldn't exist, something too large for the material universe to comfortably contain. He moves through the imperial palace like a dreamer moving through memories, past chambers he remembers building, past statues erected in his honor that make him flinch, past cathedrals dedicated to his worship that he would have ordered demolished in another lifetime. Guilliman is waiting in the Sanctum Imperialis, along with the High Lords, the Captain General of the Custodians, and a handful of others deemed important enough to witness whatever comes next. When the God Emperor enters the chamber, half of them fall to their knees immediately. Guilliman stands, though his enhanced physiology is screaming at him to kneel, to worship, to submit to the sheer presence radiating from his father. "Father," Guilliman says, and his voice sounds small even to himself. Are you still?" "Yes." The God Emperor's voice is layered, harmonious, carrying undertones that no human throat could produce. "And no, I am what remains. I am what was demanded. I am the price of survival." "Then the Imperium is saved?" The God Emperor's expression, if something that transcends mere facial features can have an expression, shifts into something that might be bitter amusement. "The Imperium is already lost, my son. It has been lost since the moment I sat upon that cursed throne. What you've built in my name, what you've sustained through faith and fear and endless war, this is not what I wanted. This is everything I fought to prevent." The words hit Guilliman like physical blows. "Then what do we do? What was the point of any of it?" "The point," the God Emperor says, and now his voice is gentle, almost human, "was that you survived. Against impossible odds, despite every mistake, in defiance of gods and Xenos and the universe itself, humanity endured. That was always the goal. Not the method, not the ideology, just survival. And you've succeeded, at terrible cost, but you've succeeded." He turns, and his gaze sweeps across those gathered. Each person he looks at experiences a moment of absolute understanding, seeing themselves as he sees them, with all their flaws and potential laid bare. It's not judgment. It's recognition. Acknowledgement that they've done the best they could with the tools they had. "But now," the God Emperor continues, "we enter the endgame. The Chaos Gods know what I've become. They're mobilizing everything they have to destroy humanity before I can consolidate my power. And I ... He pauses, and for a moment, the facade cracks. For just an instant, they see not a god but an old man, infinitely tired, carrying a burden no being should have to bear. "I will do what I must. But understand this, what I am about to do, what I must become to wage this war, will change everything. The Imperium, as you know, it will not survive. Humanity itself may not survive unchanged, but it will survive. That is the only promise I can make. In the warp, the battle is already beginning." The God Emperor's presence manifests as a fifth domain, a realm of gold and fire and absolute order carved into the screaming chaos of the Imperium. It's not beautiful, it's not peaceful. It's a fortress, a bulwark, a line drawn in reality itself that says, "This far and no further." Every demon that approaches it burns. Every corruption that touches it is purged. Every whisper of chaos that tries to seep through finds itself facing something that will not yield, will not accept anything less than total victory. Khorne throws his legions at this golden realm, endless tides of bloodletters and flesh hounds and demon princes drunk on rage. They break against it like waves against a cliff. The blood god roars his fury, challenges the newcomer to single combat, promises glorious battle for eternity. The God Emperor doesn't respond, he doesn't need to. His domain simply expands, consuming another fragment of Khorne's territory, converting it to his purpose. This isn't a fight, it's an annexation. Tzeentch tries subtlety, weaving plots within plots, attempting to corrupt the God Emperor's followers, to turn his own faith against him. But the architect of fate discovers something disturbing. His schemes don't work on the God Emperor's domain. Cause and effect flow differently there. Probability operates by different rules. It's like trying to play chess against an opponent who can rewrite the rules each turn. Every plan Tzeentch crafts unravels before it comes to fruition. For the first time in his existence, the master of manipulation realizes he's being outplayed. Nurgle sends plagues into real space, diseases designed to break spirits rather than just bodies, despairs that spread like contagion. But wherever the God Emperor's influence reaches, hope persists. Not the naive hope of better days, the grim, determined hope of people who've decided that surrender is simply not an option. Grandfather Nurgle finds his gifts rejected, his blessings turned away. The faithful die still believing, and that belief armors their souls against his corruption, even in death. Slaanesh tries seduction, offering the God Emperor everything he's lost: his humanity, his original purpose, freedom from the burden of godhood. "Join us," she who thirsts whispers across the warp. "Embrace what you've become. There is pleasure in divinity, beauty in transcendence. Why resist?" But the God Emperor has already made his choice. He's already sacrificed everything he was. There's nothing left to tempt, nothing left to corrupt. He is purpose incarnate, and that purpose leaves no room for distraction. The Chaos Gods realize, finally and completely, that they've made a catastrophic miscalculation. They thought creating a fifth god would add another player to the great game, another entity to manipulate and scheme with and occasionally war against. They didn't understand that the God Emperor isn't interested in playing. He's here to end the game entirely. On a million worlds, the faithful feel the shift. They don't understand what's happened, can't comprehend the metaphysics of divine ascension, but they know something fundamental has changed. The prayers they've offered for 10,000 years are suddenly being answered. Not in the vague, interpretable way of miracles and providence, but directly and immediately. Sisters of battle find their faith manifests as literal shields of light. Guardsmen discover their courage in the face of demons isn't just psychological, it's psychically toxic to the creatures of chaos. The Emperor's protection, which was always more hope than reality, has become something measurable, tangible, real. But there's a cost. There's always a cost. The God Emperor is connected to every human in the galaxy now. Every prayer is a thread. Every act of faith is a bond. And through those connections, he feels everything. Every death. Every moment of suffering. Every desperate plea for salvation. 10,000 years ago, he carried the knowledge of humanity's potential. Now he carries the weight of their actual experience, and it's crushing. No being, not even a god, was meant to bear that kind of consciousness. In the Sanctum Imperialis, Gilliman watches as his father, or the thing his father has become, prepares to return to the warp and wage the war that will determine humanity's ultimate fate. "Will we see you again?" he asks. The God Emperor looks at his son with something that might be affection, might be pity, might be both. "The man you knew is gone, Roboute. What remains will fight until either chaos is broken or I am. But know this, I am proud of you. Of all my sons, you understood best what I was trying to build. You saw the dream even when the reality fell short. Continue that work. Make the Imperium something worth saving. Because if I win this war, when the dust settles, humanity will need leaders who remember that power is meant to serve, not to rule." He turns away, and his form begins to dissolve into golden light. But before he disappears entirely, he speaks one last time, and his voice carries a weight that will echo through history. "I never wanted to be your god, but I will be your shield. I will be your sword. I will be whatever you need me to be, no matter the cost to myself. Because that is what it means to truly love humanity, to sacrifice everything, even your principles, for their survival." And then he's gone, pulled back into the warp to wage a war that will make the Horus Heresy look like a skirmish. A war between gods. A war for the soul of the galaxy. A war that humanity, for once, might actually have a chance of winning. The fifth Chaos God has arrived, and he's not here to play their game. He's here to burn it all down. The war in the warp is not like wars in real space. There are no battle lines, no territories that stay conquered, no victories that remain permanent. It's a conflict fought across infinite dimensions where time moves sideways and cause can follow effect. Demons that die simply reform. Gods that lose ground reclaim it through schemes millennia in the making. It's an eternal stalemate by design, because the chaos gods are fueled by the very emotions that war creates. Every battle feeds them. Every death strengthens them. Fighting them is like trying to extinguish a fire by adding more fuel. But the God Emperor doesn't fight like they expect. He doesn't match rage with rage or scheme with counter-scheme. He fights with something the warp has never truly encountered before: disciplined hope. Not the wild, desperate hope of the doomed, but the calculated, strategic hope of people who've looked at impossible odds and decided those odds are merely a challenge to overcome. It's humanity's greatest trait, weaponized into divine power, the ability to face annihilation and respond with "not today." The Chaos Gods discover what it means to fight an enemy who treats godhood as a burden rather than a privilege. They're used to entities that revel in their power, that grow drunk on worship and lose themselves in their own mythology. The God Emperor does none of that. He wields his divinity like a tool, like a weapon he despises but refuses to put down because the alternative is watching everything burn. There's no joy in it, no satisfaction, just grim, endless determination. And slowly, impossibly, the tide begins to turn. Not quickly, not in any way that the average Imperial citizen would notice. But those who watch the warp, the navigators, the astropaths, the scholars of the veiled chamber, they see it. The storms are calming in some regions. The demonic incursions are becoming less frequent in certain sectors. It's not victory, not even close, but it's something the Imperium hasn't experienced in 10,000 years: progress. Actual, measurable progress against chaos. On Terra, Guilliman stands in what was once the throne room and is now simply an empty chamber of melted gold and burnt stone. He's thinking about his father's last words. About the man who never wanted to be a god becoming one anyway. About the price of survival when the bill comes due in pieces of your own soul. He gave us a chance, Guilliman says to the empty room. The question is whether we're wise enough to use it. Because that's what this all comes down to, isn't it? The Emperor spent 40,000 years trying to save humanity from itself, only to be transformed by the very faith he tried to eliminate. He became a god because humans needed one, because they couldn't conceive of surviving without divine protection. But what happens now? What does humanity become when their god is real, present, and actively fighting on their behalf? Do they learn to stand on their own eventually? Or do they become more dependent, more willing to let their deity fight their battles? The God Emperor gave them a shield, but shields can protect or they can make you forget how to dodge. Which will it be? Across the galaxy, different people are having different revelations. A young priest on a frontier world realizes that his prayers are being answered, but that doesn't mean he can stop working. Faith without action is just noise. A sister of battle, fresh from a battle where she manifested golden wings and drove back a demon incursion, understands that power given is still power that must be wielded responsibly. A navigator, blind now from staring too long at the Emperor's light, teaches her apprentices that some things are too bright to look at directly. You have to learn to see them in reflection, in their effects, in the shadows they cast. Humanity is beginning to understand something that might save them or doom them. Having a god doesn't mean you get to stop being human. The responsibilities remain. The choices are still yours. The God Emperor can hold back the darkness, but he can't live your life for you. That was always his message, even if it took becoming the thing he hated most for people to finally understand it. In the warp, the eternal war continues. The Chaos Gods are not defeated. They cannot be defeated as long as sentient beings feel emotion. But they're contained in ways they've never been before. The God Emperor's domain acts as a buffer, a firebreak preventing their influence from consuming everything. It's not the victory the Emperor wanted. It's not the rational, secular Imperium he dreamed of building, but it's survival. And after 40,000 years of sliding toward extinction, Survival is its own kind of miracle. There are rumors now spreading through the Imperium like seeds on the wind. Stories of a golden warrior appearing on the most desperate battlefields, fighting alongside the faithful before vanishing like morning mist. Tales of soldiers who should have died but didn't, saved by light that came from nowhere. Accounts of space marines who swear they heard their Primarch's voice in their darkest moment, or saw the Emperor's face in the flames of battle and found the strength to keep fighting. Are these manifestations real? Is the God Emperor somehow projecting fragments of himself across the galaxy while fighting in the warp? Or are they simply what they've always been, the human mind finding hope in darkness, creating meaning from chaos, refusing to accept that the universe is cold and uncaring? Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe the truth is that belief and reality have become so intertwined in this new age that the distinction is meaningless. The scholars of the Administratum are already arguing about what to call this period of history. Some suggest the Age of Ascension. Others prefer the era of the Fifth Power. A few radicals whisper about calling it the end of faith, not because faith has disappeared, but because it's been validated. When your God is provably real and actively involved in material events, is it still faith? Or has it become something else entirely? But there's one name that's gaining traction among those who lived through the transformation, who felt that moment when the Emperor's consciousness touched every human soul in the galaxy. They call it the Age of Sacrifice, because that's what it truly represents. The Emperor sacrificing his humanity to save theirs. The greatest man who ever lived, giving up everything he was, everything he believed, to become what humanity needed rather than what he wanted. It's the ultimate act of love, though love twisted into a shape so strange that most can't recognize it for what it is. Parental love taken to its logical extreme, a father destroying himself to protect his children, even knowing those children will never fully understand what was lost. Somewhere in the warp, in that golden domain that pushes back against the eternal night, there might still be a fragment of the man who was the Emperor. A piece of consciousness that remembers walking through ancient Anatolia, that recalls the dreams of an enlightened secular Imperium, that mourns what could have been. If that fragment exists, if it's still capable of thought amid the vast alien consciousness of godhood, what does it think about what's happened? Perhaps it takes comfort in the fact that humanity endures. That against all odds, against the predations of chaos and xenos and their own worst impulses, the human species survives into another millennium. Perhaps it looks at its transformed self and thinks, "This is not what I wanted, but it is what was needed." And the needs of the many must outweigh the preferences of the one. Or perhaps it simply screams, endlessly, in the spaces between thoughts, mourning a loss so profound that even divinity cannot ease the pain of it. We'll never know. The man who was the Emperor is gone, and what remains doesn't speak in ways that humans can fully understand. We have our God now, whether we wanted one or not. And he has us, chained to his purpose by bonds of faith that might be our salvation or our ultimate prison. The question that started this story, is the Emperor becoming the fifth Chaos God, has been answered. Not becoming. Has become. But the more important question is, when we're only beginning to understand, what does it mean for humanity to have a God who hates being worshipped, who fights for those who pray to him while wishing they would learn to stand without prayer, who protects with one hand while the other reaches desperately for a future where protection isn't necessary? Maybe that's the final irony. The Emperor spent 40,000 years trying to teach humanity to stand on their own, and in becoming their God, he's created a situation where they finally might have to, because a God at war cannot hold your hand. A deity fighting for survival in dimensions beyond comprehension cannot solve your daily problems. The God Emperor can keep the darkness at bay, but he cannot live your life for you. That responsibility, that choice, that burden of being human, it remains yours. It always has. And perhaps that's what the Emperor was trying to say all along, in his own harsh, uncompromising way. Gods are crutches for species that haven't learned to walk. But if you must have a God, Let it be one who wants nothing more than for you to outgrow the need for him. Somewhere on Terra, in the ruins of the throne room, a custodian stands vigil over empty space. There's nothing left to guard, not really. The Emperor's in the warp now, fighting battles no mortal will ever witness. But the custodian remains at his post because duty doesn't end when it becomes symbolic. Because someone must remember what was sacrificed, what was lost, what price humanity paid for its continued existence. The Golden Warrior stands in silence, and if you listened very carefully, you might hear him whisper a prayer. Not to the God Emperor, for him. Because gods need prayers too, especially gods who never wanted to exist in the first place. And in the warp, in that vast battlefield where divinity clashes with divinity, perhaps something hears that prayer. Perhaps it helps, just a little. Perhaps it reminds the God Emperor why he endures this existence he never chose. Because somewhere in the material universe, there are still people who understand what was sacrificed, who remember the dream of what humanity could become, who carry forward the vision even when the visionary has been transformed beyond recognition. That's faith too, just a different kind. The kind the Emperor might actually approve of, if any fragment of his approval still exists. The war continues, the Imperium endures, and humanity, caught between a god who wishes he wasn't and chaos gods who wish he never became, stumbles forward into an uncertain future. But they stumble together, united by belief in something greater than themselves, even if that something wishes desperately that they would learn to believe in themselves instead. It's not the ending anyone wanted, but it's the ending we have. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough.